Thank you for attending and taking the time from your nice afternoon. It is a nice weather outside. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for taking the time as well to give an informative presentation. My name is Emil Forjo. I'm the Business Assistant Manager at Common Capital. Common Capital is a nonprofit loan fund. We are a CDFI, a community financial development financial institution. We make loans to small businesses in the Western Mass area for people who cannot get a loan from the bank, and we help people start, grow their businesses. We finance equipment, lease improvement, anything working capital related to the business, and we provide a free business advising, business technical assistant for education, webinars, training, and all those things for our borrowers. And as well as we have those webinars open to the public to, have more information to small business and the local community. Sarah, take it from there.
Thanks, Emil. Just want to say thanks so much to yourself, Roberto Nieves, and Common Capital for inviting me to present today. This is a really important topic, and hopefully I'm going to provide some practical, useful information today for people who may be getting ready to sign their first commercial lease or are in a commercial lease and just need some more tips about how to navigate that as we move through our brick and mortar phases of our businesses. So let me start my screen share. Let's get our presentation up. Give me 1 second here. We've got Canva. Okay. Screen share. There we go. Great. Okay, so I'm Sarah Pascale. I've been practicing law for 15 years. And are you guys able to see the full screen of that? Good. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I started my own business in 2019, and it's been a wild ride, but I'm still going. I focus on estate planning and real estate, and I myself have signed and am now taking part in my first commercial lease experience. And one thing I like to start off with and say, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but commercial leases are very different from residential leases. So I have an office in downtown Springfield. I'll share my contact info at the end of the presentation if anyone wants to reach out with some specific questions about their situation that they may or may not want to share on the presentation today. So let's get started with our roadmap. We're going to just go very basic to start off with. What's a lease? We're going to talk about key terms. We're going to talk about there's 3 main types of leases, kind of woven in and out of the entire presentation. I'll be talking about pitfalls and negotiation tips, things to watch out for, just some practical things that I've encountered throughout my experience, and I've seen clients experience working with business owners. So part of my experience in working with business owners, as I had said just before we started our presentation, is that we know so much about our individual businesses. We know what we need to do. We know what licenses we need to get, what business certificates, all those kinds of things. But when it comes to commercial real estate, and we're so excited to get that first space or maybe a second space, and we just want to sign the paperwork right away. We maybe have a loan pending, or we have a business partner, or we have clients that we're talking to and we're saying, I'm going to have this space soon and we want to get it done. And we want to get our security deposit down and things getting started and moved in. But there's some steps that should just not be skipped. So we'll talk about that stuff as we go through here. So very basic. What is a lease? And this is from Black's Law Dictionary. Any agreement which gives rise to a relationship of landlord and tenant, or lessor and lessee. And so One thing I want you guys to think about anytime you're looking at a piece of paper that says agreement, I want you to think contract. This is a contract that I'm signing. So where you have to think a little bit like a lawyer at this point. Anytime it says we agree, lessee, that's us. We're the business owners, we're the tenants. Anytime it says lessee agrees to do this, lessee agrees to do that, that's us. That's an obligation on us as the business owner. And reversely, the landlord is the lessor. Anytime it says lessor agrees, lessor is obliged to do this, that's the landlord. So it works both ways. A lease can be oral or written. I encourage people to have things in writing because it makes it very, very difficult to get something enforced that's not in writing. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. So tomorrow, we're going to keep going with the lease, and we're going to talk about written leases for the most part in this presentation. Key terms, lessor, that's our landlord. One of the things I wanted to touch on is you might be in contact with someone who is a broker or an agent who, after this contract is signed, you're never going to talk to again. You may never email with them again. You want to know when you're working on reviewing this lease, is the person that's giving you the lease and wanting you to sign it, are they going to be the one that is going to be your point of contact throughout the experience? Is it a property management company? Is it an employee of the management company that you're going to be reaching out to? Is it an individual? Is it an LLC? Your lessor is your landlord. That, like I mentioned in the last slide, the lessee, that's us, that's the tenants. You're going to want to pay attention to, this is very basic, but when you're signing the lease, you're going to want to make sure that you have the name of the business on the lease and not your own personal name. So even if you have a DBA, you're going to have your name, DBA, and then the business, because we want to limit the liability that you're facing as an individual as opposed to the business. Okay, next slide. A lot of things mistakes that get made in reviewing leases is people often think, which is a natural way to think, but that a commercial lease is very similar to a residential lease. So I'm sure many, if not all of us, have signed residential leases before. Residential leases, there's a broad spectrum of law that governs residential leases. There's safety guards in place. Federal and state statutes govern residential leases. And commercial leases are governed by contract law. So that means almost anything goes in a commercial lease. And that means for us as business owners, that can be a positive. It means that commercial leases can be highly negotiable. Want to get a second pair of eyes on your contract before you make this gigantic financial commitment in your life. I think that one thing that happens with business owners and other individuals when they're signing a lease is they take the document and it's overwhelming. They don't understand it. When I signed my first commercial lease, it was 18 pages long. I'm an attorney and I was reading it and I needed to take breaks just to reset and say, what is this actually saying? You know, what are my obligations here? How much is the actual rent that I'm paying? Things like that. But my point with that is we don't have to take for gospel what's in the lease and just sign it without negotiating. We can review it. We can ask questions of the landlord. If you hire someone to look at the lease and negotiate on your behalf, there are tenant-friendly provisions, there are landlord-friendly provisions, and then there's somewhere in the middle. So not everything on that first draft of the lease is gospel. So just want to encourage you to think about that in that way going forward. Not going to talk too much about a letter of intent, but basically it's just an agreement that we're going to agree to sign a lease later, but sometimes they're binding, sometimes they're not binding. It's a way for landlords and tenants to kind of vet each other out and see if both parties are serious about going forward with a commercial lease. Some of the main key provisions that might be in a letter of intent are who's going to pay for utilities, who's going to pay operating expenses, what your base rent is going to be, the timing, whether it's subject to renewal, some basic things before an actual lease gets signed. Emil, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question because sometimes
Yeah.
businesses come to us, they come to Common Capital because they are asking for a loan to open their business. So we ask them they didn't sign the lease, which is they don't have to sign lease if maybe it is if they get the loan so they can go forward with the business. But we need to see this piece of document. Can you explain more if there is any obligation, what they need to be in this one, or it is letter of intent if something didn't go through, so that it is that's it.
You want me to talk about a letter of intent and whether it's
Yeah.
actually binding or not?
What more information need to be added as well? Is kind of similar to the lease they will sign later on, or this is a different thing? Because we don't want them to get the letter of intent and okay, we get the loan, and then when they want to sign the actual lease, it might be the language might be different than what they have internally or intentionally. Sorry.
Sure. So, Emil, the letter of intent, if it's signed by both parties and it has certain terms in it, then that's really what needs to be mirrored in the actual lease agreement. If there's discrepancies there, then those really need to match what was in the letter of intent. Otherwise, it's not binding. So yeah, it's a way, it can be protective of the tenant if the actual lease agreement doesn't match up with that. Thanks for asking that question. So again, that's why it's good to have a second set of eyes look at both documents to make sure that both of them mirror each other, because a letter of intent document is typically going to be a much shorter document, and the actual terms are going to be buried in this larger commercial lease agreement. So someone's going to have to sift through and make sure those terms match the actual terms in the letter. So does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, great. This is a provision that is usually at the end of a contract, but I wanted to bring it up in the beginning of my presentation because this kind of actually goes along with Emil's question a little bit, but oftentimes I have someone will come to me and say, can you look at this lease? I read the lease, I get back to them and I say, okay, this is what this says. And then invariably the person I'm reviewing it for will say, oh, we agreed about this, or we said this, but it's not in the actual document. So there's usually at the end of a contract, any contract, but especially a commercial lease, we have a final expression of agreement clause. And if it doesn't make it into the written contract, it's not part of the contract. So it doesn't matter, even if it's a written email, a text. That's some of the problem that we have with text messages now. Yes, it's technically in writing, but later on, if we need to enforce something, it's really got to be in the actual contract language. So I don't want to beat a dead horse with this, but it's very important. And this is a sample of a final expression clause. The agreement, remember, every time we see the word agreement, we want to think contract. This contract constitutes the entire contract and understanding between the parties with respect to the subject matter hereof, supersedes all prior written agreements and understandings, whether oral or written. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're definitely going to see that in your leases. So talk to your attorney or your person that is reviewing the lease and let them know if what they are telling you about what's in it is different from your understanding, and get that ironed out before you sign. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about a few key terms before we dive a little bit more into different types of leases. When we sign a residential lease, we know what our rent's going to be, and we know what our utilities are going to be. Landlord's going to pay this, we're going to pay that. It's all spelled out in a residential lease. Commercial lease, base rent. If you guys have spent any time on LoopNet or worked with brokers or done other listing sites online, doesn't always say what the base rent is. Oftentimes it'll say $18.50 per square foot per annum. So then you have to do your own math there and figure out what the annual amount is, and then divide it by 12 to see what your actual base monthly rent is going to be. Not always the case, but often the case with commercial. Just some practical things. Think about how much space you're actually going to need. Go check it out. Don't be pressured. Go look at it a couple times. Get a feel for it. Do you need this much space? How much staff are you going to have? How many employees? You can always expand to a larger space later, but you're going to be on the hook for this base rent for the term of the lease. So just some things, practical things that every business owner is going to consider. Our next section of key terms. Operating expenses are taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Operating expenses for commercial spaces largely vary, and they vary on the contract. Maintenance, HVAC, landscaping, custodial, parking, CAM. What is CAM? That's something we see in a lot of commercial leases. Common area maintenance charges. Depending on what your lease says, those can be due at any time of the year. They can be monthly, quarterly, annually, biannually. We have some examples: landscaping, cleaning, parking. You're going to want to know what your base rent is going to be, and you're going to want to know an estimate of what your CAM is going to be before you sign the lease. So I would ask your landlord or the property manager, whoever you're dealing with, to give you an example of what the costs were for the last year before you entered the space. Now, may or may not be super relevant if the space was vacant for a while, but if there was a similar business in that space, it'll give you a good idea about what those expenses are going to be. Okay. Three main types of leases: gross lease, net lease, modified gross lease. So our gross lease is very tenant friendly. That's where we're paying a base rent. We know what the base rent is every month. It's set, it's in the contract, and the landlord pays all of the operating expenses. So they're paying the taxes, they're paying the building insurance, and they're paying the maintenance. Net lease. It's a combination. We're paying the base rent and some of the operating expenses, and the landlord is paying the rest of the operating expenses. So just move my thing over here. Single net lease. We pay base rent plus the property taxes. So property taxes are set. That's something you can ask about. Like I mentioned in the last slide, what were the property taxes on this property for the last year? And not only that, but how are the property taxes apportioned between the tenants? Is it, if you're in a small plaza with 4 spaces, is it a 4-way split? Or is it a split based on the square footage of the space? So that's a question you're going to want to ask. How is that portioned out? Double net lease. Tenant pays the base rent plus the property taxes plus building insurance. That same question is going to apply. I want to see what the numbers were for the insurance on the building for the last year, if they'll provide that to you. And also the same question, how is that portioned out amongst the tenants, square footage, number of tenants, etc. Triple net leases are the least tenant friendly. That's the one where you're paying base rent, property taxes, building insurance, and the maintenance expenses. So
Can you just tell me again, what was the last slide? It went so quick that I didn't quite get it in my head. It was contrasting with the net lease, the gross lease. Okay, great.
gross
And
lease.
let me just take a picture of that too, so I know what I'm.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Gross lease, net lease, and then our next one is like a combination. A modified gross lease is like a hybrid between a net lease and a gross lease. This is a common type of lease when you have multiple tenants in a commercial space. So can be in a high rise downtown, or can be in an office complex where you have multiple different spaces, can be in a retail space. Sometimes you'll be able to tell. So this is my caveat on these. Sometimes you'll be able to tell what type of lease it is prior to getting it. If the landlord is being transparent and they want to put on the listing, oh, this is a triple net lease. Sometimes you're not going to know. You're not going to get a copy of a lease and it's going to say on the top, this is a triple net lease. It's all going to be embedded in the language of the lease. That's just my caveat about that. But I think it's important to have the knowledge that there's these different types out there and that some are more tenant friendly than others. Okay. We're living in, and we have been living in quite an economy for the last few years. So one of my practical tips for you guys today is, if you're in a situation where you're considering signing a lease and you're going to be on the hook for the taxes, maintenance, and the insurance, or any of those portions, ask if you can put some caps on. The landlord may or may not be amenable to that, but I think it's worth asking for. Your base rent is going to be the only fixed thing that you're paying for. Everything else is pretty variable, but if you can have a cap on that, I think that would be something definitely worth asking for in the negotiation stage.
Is there ever like any like definition broken out between like maintenance versus capital improvements in these kinds of things? Like when they say maintenance, can it grow to encompass all kinds of things?
Yeah, so that'll depend on the language in the lease, right? So that's where you're going to want to have some specific definitions in your actual lease of what the maintenance is. You want to have it specific as possible so you know what you're going to be on the hook for. If they say just say maintenance. So does maintenance mean general repairs? I've seen in some leases where tenant is on the hook for repairs within the unit, but landlord is on the hook if it has to be replaced. So those are definitely things to think about. I had another situation recently where a tenant, the property was in a town and it wasn't on city, town and water, it was a septic tank. So obviously that can be an expensive repair and or replace. So things like that need to be spelled out. I would say the more specific you can get, the better for you. As the tenant.
I can ask another question about
Yeah.
like I know with residential, you can't be charged for utilities that aren't metered separately as an extra cost. Is there any kind of comparable thing in commercial leases?
So no. It's all what's contracted for. There's a broad spectrum there. So that's definitely a question you're going to ask prior to signing is, Are they metered? Or is it literally just the building is metered and you're splitting it in 5 with all the other tenants, regardless of how much each tenant uses? That's, yeah. So there's no statutory safeguard there. I'm not going to do this with you guys. I just had a couple slides with the legalese, so just I'm not going to do the rest of the presentation in legalese, I promise you. But here's an example of some terms, right? Lessee, that's us, shall hold the lease premises for a period of 2 years, commencing on August 1st, 2026, and ending on the second anniversary of the commencement date. So that would be August 1st, 2028. So long as there has occurred and is continuing no event of default during the term of this lease. So in other words, if you didn't violate any of the contract terms during the term of the lease, and the terms of default would be laid out in the contract, not paying rent, things like that. The lessee, that's us, shall have the right to renew this lease for 2 additional terms of 2 years. So 4 more years we could possibly renew. Such terms shall be deemed to be exercised unless the lessee notifies the lessor in writing to the contrary no later than 90 days prior to the expiration of the then current lease term. Any such lease renewal shall be upon all the same terms and conditions as set forth herein, except for rent, which shall be determined by mutual agreement of the lessor and the lessee. Hard to know when you're starting a lease. Impossible to know whether you're going to want to renew in a couple of years or not. So something to consider is how much work are you putting into getting the space ready? What's the location like? Is it going to be a good location for the next 5 to 10 years for your business? Is this just a starter location? Like when you're purchasing your first home, you know you're not going to stay there forever. Is it just a starter home for you? It's just an example. I did want to bring your guys' attention to another key term, tenant escalations. So I haven't seen these in residential leases. Pretty sure you're not allowed to do it in a residential lease, but in commercial leases, they have oftentimes a tenant escalation clause. So they tell you what your base rent is going to be for a certain term, and then they tell you the increase. So example, $750 a month for your first year, $850 a month for your second year. If you're going to have a 5-year lease, a 3-year lease, again, impossible to know, but take a good look at your numbers prior to getting in the space. And you got to consider, am I willing to sign a commercial lease with tenant escalations? Or do I want to negotiate down to maybe just a 1-year or a 2-year lease and have the base rent be the same? It's really hard. It's a gamble. You guys all know that as business owners, a lot of this stuff we're trying to, we're making our strategic plans. We're looking at our numbers. A lot of it is a leap of faith, but the tenant escalations, you got to be prepared for the fact that if you're signing something with this, you got to keep making that revenue and increasing your revenue every year in order to keep up with the base rent. I see a question in the chat. Can we get the slides? Yes, I will figure out a way to do that with Emil afterwards. Something else that we see in commercial leases that we don't see in residential leases are tenant improvement allowances. So depending on what your guys' business is, this can be a great negotiation tool for you. It's a landlord provided some that covers all or part of a build out cost. So depending on what your business is, if you're looking at a real retail space and you need to put dressing rooms in, if you're putting in a coffee shop and you need a counter space and you need storage in the back and it's just a big empty space, but you need closets and things like that, you're going to need to do some build out. So tenant improvement allowance can be paid directly to you at the commencement of the lease, so you can get it ready for your customers. It can be paid directly to your contractors who are getting the space ready, or one, I think my personal favorite out of the three of these is spreading it out across the life of your lease to reduce your monthly base rent. So that helps you out long term. That's something that is definitely negotiable with your landlord.
How common is this? Like when I see it in people's pro formas, I'm often like, oh, I wonder if they're having a great fantasy life or if they've like, if the landlord's signaling, you know, like I'm just interested in like how often this really happens.
Yeah, I think that it's very dependent on the location of the business and how hungry both parties are. Honestly, like how hungry is the landlord to get you in that space for the next however many years that they want to provide you with this financial incentive. You know, I know during the pandemic, there were so many commercial spaces that were empty. I think it was probably more common a few years ago during that time that people were like, we got to get people in these spaces. So I don't know if that answers your question, Rebecca, but my build out on my space was simply painting a couple of walls. They already had offices set up, so they offered to paint a few walls and create a storage area for my copy machine. So, you know, I'm in the services business. I don't have I don't need to have a commercial kitchen and things like that. I just think it depends on the nature of your business. Okay. Exclusive use clause. This is something you're going to want to fight for in a lease. You're running a coffee shop, you're running a yoga studio, you're running a gym, you're a strength coach. You want to make sure that within your immediate vicinity there, in the area that your landlord owns, that you're going to be the only type of that business because you want to limit your competition, right? So depends on, again, very location contingent. Are you in downtown Springfield? Are you in Florence, Mass? Are you in Hamden, Mass? But this is something that you want to prevent competition. You want as much business going to you as possible. Permitted use clause. This is always going to be in a commercial lease. If you're running a pizza shop, you can't have retail in there as well for the most part, things like that. You have a yoga studio, you're not going to be running an accounting office out of that space. That could be a reason for a landlord to say that you're in default. So it's usually going to be in a lease. Here's another practical tip I have for you guys. Even if you're not going to be paying building insurance on a commercial space, most landlords are going to want you to prove that you have some type of general liability insurance, so that if someone is coming into your space and they have a slip and fall, etc., that they're not going to be the only ones on the hook to settle a demand or a lawsuit. So get your insurance quotes early before you sign something, because you don't want to sign a lease and make this huge financial commitment and then after you've signed it, realize, oh my God, I have to get insurance and it's going to be a huge bill on top of what I'm already signing up for with my operating expenses and my base rent. So get yourself a good insurance person that you can talk to, get some quotes, depending on the type of business. If you have like a transportation business or things where you're having vehicles, you're already going to have your automobile liability insurance set up on those, but I know there's different provisions for commercial, passenger, as opposed to just a personal vehicle. So depending on what type of business you have, you may have to have multiple types of insurance in order to even get into a brick and mortar space. Signage clause. Who doesn't want signage? Defines who, what, when, where, why, where you can put your signage, who's going to pay for it, what it's going to look like. You guys have all seen different plazas where everyone's got a different type of sign, different colors, different fonts. Sometimes there's plazas and signage where it has to be all the same font, all the same size. So that's all variable per the space, but you're going to want to know about that because you're going to want to advertise that you're there and you want your clients and customers to be able to find you. More of a practical thing, right of entry clause. I see a question in the chat. Allowable signage is a huge issue for many of my clients. Okay, that's good to know, Rebecca. Yeah. That's, do you want to speak more about that or just, yeah, so I'm glad I brought that up then. Right of entry clause. Your landlord owns the property. They can't just go waltzing in whenever they want. You know, that's similar to a residential lease. You're going to want to make sure you have a provision in there that they're not allowed to come in without a certain amount of notice, unless there's an emergency and they need to come in. Do they need to fix a pipe? Is there a fire? Is there something going on there that needs an immediate fix? But just because they own the building doesn't mean they can come in whenever they want and disrupt your business. Let me get to the next slide. Transfer and assignment. Here's another thing that comes up. You're in a lease. Maybe your finances aren't going as greatly as you want them to go. You think, oh, I want to get a partner in here or another type of business to split this space with. Don't assume that you're going to be able to do that. Most of the contracts I see are going to require your landlord to give a written approval about subleasing or adding another tenant into your actual space. So those are provisions that need to be read over very closely to make sure you know what your options are prior to signing. Renewal clause. I think I touched on this a little bit before. There may or may not be a renewal clause in your lease. You know, your landlord may decide not to put one in. But if there is one, take a look at the financial terms. You might not want to leave your space. You might get so comfortable. Your clients might get so comfortable. Might be working out really well for you. You're not going to want to move. You want to know if you at least have the option. So pay attention. I think in that slide I mentioned before with the terms, there was a date of must inform your landlord 90 days before renewal if you want to renew, because otherwise they're going to make arrangements to put it back on the internet and list it with their broker or their agent. They're going to want to fill that space as quickly as possible if they know that you're not going to renew. So pay attention to that in the last 6 to 9 months, I'd say, before your lease is up so that you don't miss that deadline. A couple other things. I didn't touch on security deposits. You're going to want to know, that should probably be addressed in a letter of intent before you even get to the commercial lease stage, if there is a letter of intent. But you're going to want to know what's going to be seen as a reason not to give you your deposit back, just like when you're doing a residential lease. General wear and tear, always permissible, but huge holes in the wall, major structural damage to the inside, things like that. We want to get it all in writing about what's permissible and what's not permissible. So guys, That's all I have. I'm happy to open up for questions. Thank you for listening. If you have personal things that you want to discuss with me, reach out by email or phone, because this is the recorded webinar. We don't want to compromise anyone's information on here. And frankly, I'm not sure how to stop the recording. So I can do my screen share stop.
Can I ask a question?
Hi, Beth. Yes.
So I'm in, my business is in Amherst, and when I went to open my business 3 years ago, it is really common practice here in Amherst for landlords to require a personal guarantee on a lease. It's very much the standard in the town of Amherst, and most of the commercial property is owned by the same 3 or 4 people in Amherst. And so to get around that, I have a lease where I paid them 5 months of rent as a security deposit. And it's fine. It's done. I've been there for 3 years. It's solved. But my landlord is in the process of selling my building. And so my concern about a new lease is what happens if I end up with a new owner? Am I dealing with a totally new equation, or do they have to honor my existing situation?
Oh, that's a great question. It's going to depend on the terms of your lease. Was that
okay? So what am I looking for in that language?
Oh, you're going to look for some language to see if your lessor, your landlord, has the ability to assign that lease to another person. So I would look for some assignment language there.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you want to talk further about that, let me know. Yeah, that's definitely, I'm sure, a concern for you. Any other questions? Hi, Dee.
Hi, how you doing? Sorry, I was late coming in. I apologize. From a landlord's perspective, when you get a security deposit, I'm pretty sure that you have to put that in a separate account so that it earns interest, all of that. Do you have to put the last month's rent into an account like that also? And is it best to put those both together if you get first, last, and security?
You're talking about commercial or residential?
Commercial.
Okay. I will get back to you on that.
Okay. And how about residential while we're...
I'm not going to talk about the residential part because that's outside the scope of this, but
yeah, sure. Okay. But I was asking commercial wise.
Let me get back to you. Can you put your email in the chat for me?
Yeah, sure.
You're comfortable doing that?
Yep.
Great, thank you. Perfect.
Yeah. So it is not a scary thing when landlord sell their property and a new landlord will come. The lease should protect the tenant. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you say that again, Emil? You cut out in the beginning.
Yeah. When a new landlord come in, when the old landlord sell the property, the new landlord, so the lease agreement will protect the tenant?
So it depends on what language is in the lease. So if there's language in there that says the lease it's permissible that the lease be assigned to another landlord coming in, that's something to definitely look for.
So we should look to this language when we sign the lease.
Yeah, definitely something to think about.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah. I had somebody else in here. Do you have any commercial lease examples you can share? Yes, I'd have to do some redaction. I don't have anything, but I can do some redacting. And work with Emil to send something out. You're going to see in a commercial lease, there's going to be like sections. Great, Dee. Financial, default, terms, lessor and lessee responsibilities, renewal provision. There's going to be like certain larger sections, and then there's going to be clauses underneath those. So again, depending on who's drafting it, may or may not be easy to identify the sections. But yeah, I'll get something over to Emil and share that with you guys. Just draft. I didn't want to overwhelm you too much with legalese today. Just wanted to get some things out for you to think about as we're looking at. Oh, Lala, are you raising your hand?
Yes,
Hi.
Yes, hi. Well, when you already signed the lease, which is and you made mistakes, you didn't look for anything else, or you didn't get advice from someone else, or get a second opinion. So, my question: so if the property taxes that are in your lease, okay, and you signed and you didn't pay attention to that, and so now if you like terminate your lease, or you terminate before the deadline, can the landlord come back at you or take you to the court for that?
So there's something called an acceleration clause, where if you terminate your lease prior to the end date, sometimes the landlord will have this clause that says we can come after you for all the base rent and operating expenses that were due. So it depends on what's in your contract language.
Yeah, but how about the taxes, the property taxes? He can, because okay.
If that was part of your initial lease agreement.
Correct. Yes, it was. Yeah. Thank you. So now I just have to wait for the court order.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Lala.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Very informative. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. If not, thank you everyone for attending this informative session. I know there's a lot of complication. This is not going to end in 1 hour. Each term is different. Each condition is different. But, the conclusion is reviewing the lease it's an agreement, and an attorney and legal advice need to be, I think it's worth to have someone legal see it. So let's stop the recording, if you don't mind, from your side, I think, Sarah.
Okay, I will try to do that here. Oh, you're welcome, guys. It was a pleasure meeting.
And we can just hang out. That will be fine. If no one has any question, we can just